There's a big thing that I want to do this week, prompted by some news that Reuters put out, in which they say gender-affirming guidance for prepubescent children is non-invasive and includes professional support, experts say. And I started thinking about who are these insane experts who say such a thing, and it turns out it's WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And I spent a lot of time looking into their document, their standards of care for the health of transsexual, transgender, and gender nonconforming people. I think given that you have a lot of stuff you still want to talk about and that we're under some time pressure this week, I'm going to save this. I definitely want to come back to it. I have some dismantling of WPATH's standards of care for the health of transsexual, transgender, and gender nonconforming people. But I don't want to have it be rushed. I do want to say two more things before we segue into what you're going to do, though. One of them is, and again, I'll return to this when we do return to this with more time. Their document is literally called, once again, Standards of Care for the Health of Transsexual, Transgender, and Gender Nonconforming People. It's hard for me to do this without getting either angry or just laughing. 3 categories. Standards of care. We're talking about medical care. Transsexuals, transgender people, and gender nonconforming people.
Yeah, tomboy medicine.
There are no human transsexuals. That's not possible. Okay? That's not a possible state for humans. Humans cannot be hermaphrodites, sequential hermaphrodites. Some fish can. We're not fishing that way. We're some actinopterygians. Okay, you can look it up if you can spell it and go find what I mean.
We're fish, but we're not reef fish.
Yeah, some reef fish can. A few other non-reef fish I think can, but there are no human transsexuals. So that's an empty category. There are human transgender people, and when I say that, when Brett says that, what we mean usually is what many of the professionals are meaning when they say transsexual, and then they're lumping all of this sort of kind of gender dysphoric, but I'm not going to fully transition with all of the tools at my disposal into transgender. But I'm going to leave that as a category that is worthy of consideration with regard to what kinds of treatment and care we should be delivering to these people. The third category, for which WPATH has written an incredibly long document, which I will dismantle another time, which they say warrants standards of care, gender nonconforming people. Gender nonconforming people are people who don't entirely ascribe to the expectations of the sex to which they were born, not assigned, for their culture. Now, in 1980, to pick a date far enough in the past for it to be, I'm certain this is true, and yet not so modern that it had begun to be dismantled already. By 1980, in the United States at least, and I think in all of the weird world, although weird wasn't an acronym yet coined, it was well understood that women who desired to work full-time in the workforce and maybe weren't that interested in having a family were not less of a woman because of that. And that men who were interested in going to caregiving professions were not less of a man for doing that. Those people are gender nonconforming, as I was gender nonconforming as a child, and still in many ways am. Yeah. I have many characteristics that are more male typical than female typical. And that's what gender is. Gender is the behavioral manifestations, the personality manifestations, the softer manifestations of sex, which is hardware. And if you are a clownfish, your gender, aka your sex role, 100% follows from your sex. And when your sex changes, so does your gender, known as sex role in clownfish. And there's no negotiation. There's no ambiguity. In humans, of course, there is. We're so much more software. We've got so much more going on. And so much of the sex role in the first place, the gender, was a negotiated overlay in the first place. We don't change color when we change sex, unlike reef fish who do that. We don't change our, we don't change sex. We don't change color when a woman decides that she wants to be an aviation mechanic. You don't now have badges. Maybe you put on overalls, right? Because it's appropriate to the job. And maybe you put on overalls because you feel more comfortable in it and because it feels like an expression of who you want to be. Doesn't make you male, and it doesn't change the underlying reality. So the idea that gender nonconforming people require care require medical care, that's a sign that we are going backwards.
Requires special medical care.
That we are, right. The idea that those of us who don't fall in line with the cultural expectations of how we should act because of the sex that we were born to are lumped in with transsexual, and which doesn't exist, and transgender, which does exist, people, is itself a sign of intentional confusion and regression back towards a day when women actually weren't able to do as many things as we do now. So that's the little rant that will be included in a larger analysis of this document, which is, this document was written by the people who are the experts that Reuters is now using as their fact check when they say gender-affirming guidance for prepubescent children is non-invasive and includes professional support. Experts say, one more little teaser, one of the things they say in this document is, I'm going to find it, puberty blockers are fully reversible interventions. So I'll just leave it there. No, wrong, patently false. Everyone who's given it any thought knows this. And if you think that you're a healthcare worker and you still think that puberty blockers are fully reversible, you have no business doing the job that you're doing. You are a danger to your clients.
All right. They are gender sophists. We have to remember that, right? One does very tempted to explain everything that's wrong. On the other hand, it's cool to explain it, but it's not a requirement because it's obviously wrong. Bad news for these gender sophists. Joan of Arc was not a man.
Not a man.
Not a man.
Not a man. Nope, not a man. The other thing, which is just sort of a bigger observation, not about WPATH. I'm off that soapbox for the moment. But walking around North Portland, as I was, taking those few pictures and more, and interacting with people, where even there, it was possible to get smiles from people on the street. Not as easy as in other parts of Portland, but it was possible. My sense was, I just had this image of, and maybe it's at time, maybe it's Portland, maybe it's the West Coast, maybe it's all of the United States, maybe it's the whole world. Like we're on some giant, giant lake that's pretty flat at the edges, and it's really cold out, and it's frozen. And we're all standing on this lake. And we're just trying to exist and not freeze to death by falling into the water below. And there's yahoos coming from all the sides. And they're coming onto parts of the lake that we're on, and they start jumping up and down. And I feel like I'm hearing the ice cracking from deep in the lake. And it's radiating up, that sound, for anyone who's been on a lake in winter when maybe it wasn't quite completely frozen, and you begin to hear the ice as it cracks, and you think, I gotta get out of here. I gotta move. This is no longer safe. And if it's just you, and you weren't being too much of a yahoo yourself getting to where you are, you can probably get out of there. But there's other people on whom you have no ability to tell them, stop doing that. Stop jumping up and down on the ice. You're going to break it. And then all of us are doomed. It's really hard to save yourself. So I now, since yesterday, walking around North Portland, where it's endlessly raining, but it's not that cold. So I'm not sure where this image of this vast frozen lake came from, but I feel like everyone needs to recognize our shared fate here. We are all human beings on this finite, beautiful planet, and we are putting so much at risk with this sophistry.
Yes, and I can't help but see the sophists on the lake as throwing sledgehammers and breaking out jackhammers, and
I'm just seeing the people, and I'm seeing them jumping up and down fiercely. Like for me, we start adding machines and tools. Like that's a very male approach, right? But and you know, maybe that's just, you know, you can have that image, but for me, it's actually just this endless lake with people. And sure, they have clothes on, but it's really just frozen water and people. And because edges are less frozen and more shallow, or you know, because there's different depths and there's different places where the currents are stronger underneath, and you can't tell once it's frozen on top, but where the current is stronger, the ice will be weaker. And so jump there, but don't know what's underneath, what you are putting at risk by jumping there. And you have no idea what you're putting at risk.
Yeah.
You have no idea.
And it's not, they're not entitled to put other people's stuff at risk, which is your point. They're putting us all at risk.